Hello, my friends. Welcome to Magpie Reads. I'm Lindy. I read a lot. I've finished 6 or 7 books since the last time I made a video, so I will get to those and probably will cover them pretty briefly because I've got lots to tell you about what I've been doing lately. If you want to, you can use the timestamps down below to just skip to the parts that you are interested in this video. But I hope all of it will be interesting. So first off, I finally finished the vest that I was knitting. It was a pattern from a book that I had borrowed from the library, and the book was due back, so time to get it finished. I just had the straps left to do, not very many stitches, and I was thinking of other things, so it ends up with 4 sets of live stitches at the top, at the shoulder, and then you graft them together. And but I managed to graft the 2 front parts together, and it wasn't until I'd finished and put all the ends in that I realized, oops, to unpick it all and then attach it properly. But anyway, I'm very happy with the vest. I will pop in a photo so you can see what it looks like finished. I washed it and blocked it before I headed off on a quick trip to Vancouver. So it was all dry by the time I got home. And next, trip to Vancouver. So I took the ferry from Victoria to Vancouver and then back. I was there for 2 nights, staying with my dear friend Kathy, and she and another friend and I all went to Bard on the Beach. So Shakespeare in a park in Kitsilano. We did a double header. We saw Hamlet in the afternoon and then a comedy of errors in the evening. Both were excellent. Now, in the program notes for Hamlet, the director mentioned how often we come across Hamlet references in our daily life. And Hamlet is actually my very favorite Shakespeare play. Love it, love it, love it. So the example that the director gave was when he was reading A Night Before Christmas to his kid, I think, or a child anyway. The line, "Not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse," he realized that line comes from Hamlet. And I started reading this book, Committed, by Suzanne Scanlon, on the ferry on my way home from that trip, and I came across a reference to Hamlet. This is a memoir of Scanlon's experience being in a mental hospital for 3 years. She talks about Hamlet being grief-struck. His father has died and his mother has quickly remarried. He's told to get on, to get over it. The very suggestion enrages him. There's nothing to get over from that place of grief. He taunts Ophelia, the woman he loves. He acts out. He puts on a play. Those around him wonder at his mental state. Is he playing at madness? That becomes a question of the play. Is Hamlet mad, or is he acting madness? How can anyone know the difference? And when we got out of that play, that came up in our discussion about the play as well. Like, is Hamlet really mad? Is he just pretending to be mad? Oh, yeah. I just love watching live theater. And here's Frida, come to say hello. Where was I? Now, what they did in this production was set it in contemporary times, present day, and I thought that worked really well. They added some music and dance. One of my friends wasn't so happy about that. The other thought it was fine. Yeah. If you are a Shakespeare fan, if you love live theater, please say so in the comments down below. And the Comedy of Errors was so funny. They had such great actors. It started out with, as you came into the theater, the actors were already interacting with the audience. They were all merchants in a marketplace in ancient Greece, and stayed in character as they came into the audience trying to sell us rugs or gold or whatever. And yeah, the sets of twins, that comedy of errors that happened, so well done. Yeah. So it was a great trip, but it takes a lot of time to get to Vancouver. It's pretty much 4 to 4.5 hours from the time I leave home till the time I get to my destination, and lots of visiting, lots of excitement. So definitely did not have time to make a video, but I did get some reading done in here and there. I'll tell you about the books shortly. One of the things that happened when we were walking down Denman is jets flew overhead with colored contrails, red, white, and green colored contrails. We had to look online to see what in the heck was happening. Turns out that the aeronautic display team from the Italian Air Force has been touring Canada and the US, and they do these air shows. Why? I don't know. I don't understand air shows in general, like what exactly is the appeal, but if you like air shows, let me know in the comments down below. Still, it was pretty impressive to see these colored trails in the sky. Oh, yes, the other thing that I did while I was in Vancouver was I went shopping at a couple of Iranian shops for ingredients. So, right now I have this cookbook, Bahari, out. I've mentioned it before on my channel. I did finish reading it. It's by Dina Macki. I think I'll do a separate cookbook review of it. But it's recipes from Oman and Zanzibari, and the author's heritage includes those two countries as well as Iran and Swahili. So some of the ingredients in there are quite specific. And as I was talking to my friend Drew about this cookbook, he said he had just bought an Iranian cookbook, a great big fat tome, which he has loaned to me because he and his wife are away right now in Saskatchewan. So I looked through it. He said that he didn't know where he was going to find some of these ingredients, and I said, leave it to me. I'm going to Vancouver. I know there's Iranian grocery stores near where my friend lives, so I came back with dried limes and powdered dried limes and powdered sour grapes and golpar, which I had to look up what's golpar, and in the cookbook it explains it's Persian hogweed. Right. No, there's more information. In a grocery store, it's often called Angelica. And that was like a light bulb going off because I had remembered seeing Angelica seeds packaged for sale in an Iranian grocery store before, and I used to grow Angelica in my garden in Edmonton, and I used the roots to make an extract and I candied the stems, but I had never used the seeds for anything. well, more research and investigation, and I discovered that what's called angelica is actually a related plant, not the kind that I was growing in my garden, which was angelica, but this related plant, or Persian hogweed. It's slightly different. So the seeds are used. I got some ground angelica for trying out in some recipes. I also got barberries, dried barberries, and green raisins, and rose petals, and za'atar. I can't remember if there was anything else, but I had a list, and I found everything on my list. So I'm going to have lots of fun in the kitchen. So next I want to talk about the New York Times 100 Best Books. Shelley Swearingen went through the entire list on her channel. So if you, like me, don't have access to the New York Times because of the paywall, go to Shelley's channel and she'll run through all of the titles. I will include a link down below. So as she was talking about them, I was making notes of all of the titles that I had also read, and 62 of them. So I've read 62 out of the 100, and most of those I gave 5 stars to. So I quite like this list. There's both the, I have the curiosity of, which books made the top 100, but also the, and did I read them? And do I want to read the ones that I haven't yet read? That kind of thing. So I really like a list like this. And of course, it made me think, okay, what would be on my list? And the way this list was put together is very interesting, because the New York Times contacted over 500 writers, critics, readers, and it got them to list their top 10 books of the 21st century. And this was the result. If you want to know more about how that list was put together, the Book Riot podcast interviewed the man who was in charge at the New York Times, and it's really interesting. So if you're into statistics and how a huge project like this can happen, I'll include a link down below. So what would be my top 10? That got me down a whole rabbit hole. There are at least 3 on this list that I would include in my top 10, and those are Fun Home by Alison Bechdel, Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi, and something by Ali Smith. Now, the one on the list is How to Be Both. Maybe that's my top book of hers, or maybe it's There But For The, or maybe it's the whole Seasons quartet or companion piece. How to choose? I just love her writing so much. I might put A Visit from the Goon Squad on that top 10 list. That's by Jennifer Egan, and it was on the New York Times list as well. There's a book on there that if I would have been putting together this list last month, I would have included, and that is Runaway by Alice Munro. So it just shows how subjective something like this is. So even for a single reader, the top 10 is going to shift day to day, month to month. Now, I still think that the short stories in the collection Runaway are excellent, but my feeling towards going back to this collection are different. Now I know that Alice Munro was a bad mother. Yeah, there are changes that happen to us that make favorite books shift. So what else was on that list? There was one book by Miriam Taves, who's one of my all-time favorite authors. Women Talking was on the list. But my personal favorite of hers is All My Puny Sorrows. I would definitely include something by Helen Humphreys on my top 10. And I think that that would be Machine Without Horses. Nupaming by Leanne Bedasamose Simpson, definitely one of my top 10. But I'm not sure about the others. Then it becomes more, can I have a top 20? Can I have a top 3 dozen? What I ended up doing was going through my book blog, which I haven't updated since the end of last year, but I started it in 2009, and I've got over 1,300 entries on there. Many of those entries have a dozen short reviews within, so there are, maybe close to 2,000 titles that I've reviewed. So as I was scrolling through that, it was, a nice trip down memory lane. And also, I discovered that I did a blog post about my top 10 books of all time back in 2013. And I will include a link to that down below. But this particular top 10 that we're talking about is 21st century. So it actually helped me narrow things down because some of my top books are actually from the 20th century. So, for example, Fall on Your Knees by Anne-Marie MacDonald, and Sirius Blooms at Night by Shani Mutu, and The Lesser Blessed by Richard Van Camp, and Fugitive Pieces by Anne Michaels, and Monkey Beach by Eden Robinson. So having these kinds of restrictions helps me to at least narrow things down. But one of the criteria that I was personally using for my best books list is that these are books that I would be happy to read over and over and over. So that helped me to also narrow down, because some books had a really deep impression on me, and I feel like I don't think I could bear to read them again, even though like my top book of 2023 was No Friend But the Mountains by Behrooz Boochani. But it's also a difficult, emotionally difficult read. So I didn't include it on this list. Yeah, I would love to hear your comments about the New York Times 100 Best Books. And best, by the way, wasn't defined by the New York Times when they approached all these people and asked them to send their best books, top 10 best books. They let everybody define it as they wanted. So I think that's a good idea too. Now, one of the books that was on that top 10 list is The Argonauts by Maggie Nelson. And this is another book that I love. Didn't make my top 10, but it's one that I first listened to in audio from the library, and I loved it so much I had to go out and buy a copy so that I could then read it in print, which I did, and I'm planning to read it again. But the reason that I'm mentioning it now is because I just finished reading another book by Maggie Nelson, Bluets. Look at all my flags. So good. I loved it. Now this is a book that is hard to categorize. At the bookstore, they shelve it in poetry. It's written in 240 numbered separate entries, which Maggie Nelson calls propositions. And I think she got that term from Wittgenstein, Ludwig Wittgenstein, and that's how he did his philosophical writings. It is very philosophical. It's also a memoir about grief, so it tied in well with Hamlet. It tied in with other books that I've been reading, like Blue Postcards by Douglas Bruton. And I don't even know how to convey how intellectually exciting I found this, but also emotionally moving. That actually really surprised me. Her efforts to get over a breakup with somebody that she loved. I know Maggie Nelson as a queer writer, and there isn't explicit queer content in here. She's getting over the breakup with a man, but definitely subtext is there. Here's just one example. So this is number 72. It's easier, of course, to find dignity in one's solitude. Loneliness is solitude with a problem. Can blue solve the problem, or can it at least keep me company within it? No, not exactly. It cannot love me that way. It has no arms. But sometimes I do feel its presence to be a sort of wink. Here you are again, it says, and so am I. Yeah, Bluets. Yeah, great book, great book. Now there's another Maggie Nelson that has been on my shelf. I planned to read this in July, On Freedom. I started it way back in, I think, 2021, and didn't get very far. Was stopped by a concussion and didn't pick it up again. But I thought, I'm going to read this in memory of Jenny, who died suddenly a couple of years ago. She was the host of the Reading Envy podcast. I loved listening to her voice. I was on her podcast a number of times, and I thought, what a great way to remember her by picking up something that was on her TBR and reading it. And what I found was I just felt too sad. Every time I went to pick this up, I thought of Jenny and I felt sad about her passing, and it made me not want to read this book. So I'm going to have to give it more time before I read it. But I do have it to look forward to in the future. There's a lot about art in Bluets, including Yves Klein, the artist Yves Klein, and his blue that he named Yves Klein Blue. So, art related, I just want to mention that coming up in September, there is going to be an art related readathon called Framed in September. An announcement is going to be made on August 1st on several booktube channels, including this one, so watch for that. But it just happens that I have read several art-related books in the past week, and that includes the next one, which I listened to in audio. It's called Parade by Rachel Cusk. I'm a big fan of Rachel Cusk. I know she's not for everyone. She has a sort of experimental style. Outline, I think, was on the 100 Best Books of New York Times. I loved it in a intellectual way, in the way that it made me feel excited about the way she used language. I found Parade even more easy to connect to, and I transcribed so much from the audiobook. I've got pages and pages. It's written in 4 sections about 4 different artists. All of them are called G. Maybe G for genius, I'm not sure. I think 2 of them are men, 2 of them are women. One's a filmmaker, one's a sculptor, one's a painter, different types of artists. But it's also about their relationships, their romantic relationships and their relationships with their children, and how that affects their ability to do art. It's about the way that we as art consumers connect with art and the artists. So all that has been going on in the talk surrounding Andrea Skinner, daughter of Alice Munro, and how her revelations about Alice Munro not protecting her has affected the way that we look at Alice Munro's art, her writing. It just was so relevant to me and the emotions that I was going through. So I really appreciated that in the book Parade. Yeah. It was the perfect book at the perfect time. You know how that is sometimes. So in Parade, femininity and being an artist is explored really well. So I'd like to read a passage about that. So G was trying to show herself from the outside while she experienced the dawning knowledge of her situation and its consequences. She didn't entirely know quite what it was she had chosen. She was being led by instinct. To be led by instinct is the preeminent freedom attributed to male artists and to the making of art itself. There is a self-destructive element to that instinct and to the creative act. But in this case, the cards had been dealt out in advance. G was stepping out of a world of safety and into her own illegitimacy. A bit later on, about the same artist, G got through pregnancy awkwardly and with embarrassment. The people in her world also seemed embarrassed. What was this rude biological bulk she was imposing on them and on their sensibilities? Her loyalty wavered as a dreadful truth. The truth of her female caste came slowly and inexorably into view with its smoldering fires of injustice and servitude. So that's just a small sample from Parade, and as I said, there's 4 different artists, so they're kind of like interlinked short stories. The book itself is not too long. The audiobook is read by Genevieve Gaunt. I recommend it. And now for something completely different, still an audiobook. This one is called We Speak Through the Mountain, and it's by Premee Mohamed, who's a Alberta scientist and author. This is a novella, speculative fiction, set in the fairly near future, and it is a companion or a follow-up to her earlier book, The Annual Migration of Clouds. I did own that book, but I think I didn't keep it when I made the move from Edmonton here to Victoria. I didn't see it when I scanned my shelves anyway. The audiobook is read by Eva Tavares. The genre of this is considered hope punk. It's kind of a new term for me. It's set in a future where water is scarce. There's been a disease that has severely affected much of the population, and we hear about that in Annual Migration of Clouds. And at the end of that book, the central character, Reed, who's I think 18 or 19 in that novel, in this one she's 19, and she's going off for further education to a place in the mountains. So this is a place where people bunkered down during the big devastation or apocalypse that happened. And the people there considered that apocalypse to be the end of the world. But Reed has a different viewpoint. It was the end of that world that they knew, and she's bringing a different perspective into this more closed environment. And it's well done, very thought-provoking. I don't want to give away anything, so that's all I will say about We Speak Through the Mountain. Next is a book that I picked up on account of Marilyn Maya Mendoza. If you're not familiar with her channel, there's a link down below. So she was talking about Nilda by Nicholasa Mohr. It sounded so good, I checked to see if it was available to me. This is not a recent book. It came out, I'm actually not sure when it was first published. Maybe the 70s or the 80s. Sorry, if I find out, I will include that in a note here. So what it is a coming-of-age story. It is set during the time period of 1941 to 1945. And when we first meet the title character, Nilda, she's 10. So it's written from a close third-person point of view. So coming of age in Brooklyn. She is Puerto Rican. She's growing up in a family with a number of older siblings, and her mother is remarried to a stepfather. Their aunt, who's got mental illness, lives with them. Lots of stuff going on. It's autofiction, closely mirroring things that happened in the author's own life. I found it really engaging, and it was available on my library's Hoopla collection, so you can look for it there. And I was really pleased that this particular digital edition also includes Nicholasa Mohr's artwork throughout the book. Marilyn mentioned that it does for 1940s Brooklyn what A Tree Grows in Brooklyn does for an earlier period in the same place. And the book that it reminded me of is Alice Childress's Hero Ain't Nothing But a Sandwich. Now that one is set in Harlem in about 1970, but a similar coming-of-age story that, while its primary audience might be middle school, and so is Nilda, so probably grade 6 and up, it's also a book that I would recommend to readers all the way up into adulthood as well. So in one of those book serendipity experiences, I read Nicholasa Mohr's story about being Puerto Rican at the same time that I had just purchased this graphic work of history, The Puerto Rican War, which is by John Vasquez Mayes. I heard about this on the More to Come podcast. I will link it down below. That's one that I listen to hear about new graphic novels, comics, everything in this format. And this sounded so good, and it wasn't available at the library, so I ordered a copy. Surprisingly inexpensive for a book that is full of illustrations, and they're all done in carved wood blocks. Every page, even the words, are all carved and printed. So it is an amazing book for its artwork and also for the history that it contains. I think what I'm going to do is insert a section here where I can talk more about this book. This book is about Puerto Rican revolutionaries, and in 1950, their attempted assassination of the American President Harry S. Truman. I learned that between 1948 to 1957, there was a gag law that made it a crime to own or display a Puerto Rican flag, or to sing a patriotic tune, or to speak or write of independence in Puerto Rico. I learned a whole bunch in this book. It's really, really good. And best book, The Diviners by Margaret Lawrence. This has been a buddy read with Marilyn Maya Mendoza and Sarah of Roadworthy. We are still finishing up our discussion of the final chapter. So I won't say a whole lot, but Sarah did a great summary of the book itself and the reading experience. So I am going to link her video down below about this. It's a Canadian classic. It's the fifth book in the Manawaka cycle, all set in this fictional town in Manitoba. And it is autofiction. So a lot of this draws on Margaret Lawrence's own experiences. It's the story of a girl who was orphaned young, Morag, and grew up with foster parents, and then we go back and forth between her growing up years and the contemporary times, which is about 1970. This book was actually published in, first published in 1974, and Morag has a daughter, so it's her story as well. I've lost my words. I just want to say it's fabulous. It's a masterpiece, is what it is. It's really, really good. I thought that I had read this decades ago. Turns out that I hadn't, so I'm glad that I finally got to it. I've been thinking of other books by Margaret Lawrence that I did read, but this was my first crack at The Diviners. I will definitely read it again, and I am going to be seeing a play based on this book when I go to Stratford, Ontario, to the festival there in September. Very much looking forward to that too. So that is all I've got for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate hearing from you, so please say hello in the comments down below. Tell me what you think about any of these things I've been talking about, the New York Times 100 Best Books, or any of these books that I've told you about. So I'll say goodbye for now, and I wish you happy reading, everybody. See you soon.